Stone bricks bottom, granite top, iron bars. Before I do that, I want to get the inside of this. Which, let's say the station ends there. And let's say it ends there. Probably. Going back to what I was saying earlier about empires. Imperial identity. I mean, one way of thinking is that by not... Let's just take the European Union, for example. By not having a strong central government, in the sense that by not having an empire, by not like building a European empire, supposedly it means like you give people, you let each of the constituent states retain their own identity and culture and their their own individuality, and they're free to do whatever they like. Like they're free as members of equals or whatever. But that maybe that's too idealistic, because maybe the reality is that when you don't have this group identity, because people are people, because a lot of people are, what's the word? Ethnocentric, which is like a pleasant way of saying racist. Because they're ethnocentric, they put their ethnicity first. And so when you don't create a new European ethnicity to support the European Union, right? If you don't create a cultural construct in parallel to your legal and economic construct of Europe, then people's ethnocentric tendencies would lead them to not see each other as partners. It would, for example, lead the Italians to not agree with the Germans or whatever it is. Just examples, for example. And that would lead to more ethnocentrism, which is basically racism, and like more of like people putting their own people first, and and then the greater good second. And so then the original intent of allowing people to retain their identities as free people in the union, it would actually allow people to act out their discrimination more easily if they don't see each other as part of the same identity, because people are ethnocentric. It actually has the opposite effect. Does that make sense? Maybe that's a little too esoteric. Right, because you don't have a combined European identity, people see each other as them versus us. Whereas your dream of having a union of equals would be better served if you obliterated individual identities and created a new common identity. This is a hypothesis. I'm not saying this is necessarily true. I'm just like exploring the possibility in my head, right? Nothing's proven yet. I'm not sold on the idea yet. But that's possible, isn't it? And you know what I'm thinking about, as I said, the Roman Empire, the Athenian Empire, people like Obama and people like Trump. And then I guess the question is, are there more people like Obama in the world, or are there more people like Trump in the world? I'm afraid there's more people like Trump in the world, to be honest. And so, in a practical sense, what is going to lead to more discrimination and more racism and more injustice? Right? Is everybody having separate identities going to lead to more discrimination? Or is everybody having the same identity going to lead to more discrimination? Like, the idea of it is so abhorrent that I don't want to answer. I'll be honest with you. I don't like what I'm saying right now. If you don't like what I'm saying right now, that's perfectly understandable. I don't like what I'm saying right now. But it might be true because humanity is flawed in a lot of ways. Oh, I can't put a thing there because there's a thing there. Wait a second. I can put a ladder there. Like, I've always wondered why the Europeans don't build each other's infrastructure. If you, for example, take a look at a map of high-speed trains in Europe, you will see that there are high-speed trains in Western Europe, and then there are not very many high-speed trains in Eastern Europe. And like, why don't they just build them, right? And if you say, well, Eastern Europe doesn't have the money, well, why don't Western Europe pay for it? Presumably, because infrastructure, here's the thing about infrastructure. Infrastructure is one person has to pay for it, but everybody benefits from it. Like, infrastructure is inherently difficult because of that. And it's also why, like, governments usually have to build infrastructure. Because, like, a road doesn't make sense if you, like, build a road and only you are allowed to use it. Like, a private road doesn't really make sense in most cases. It's not efficient, right? Like, once you build a road, you might as well let everybody use it, because, you know, what are you gonna do? Use it? Keep the road all to yourself? Like, first of all, you don't need the whole road all the time. And second of all, it's better off if other people can use it and benefit from it, because it's just good for the economy in general. Anyway, the nature of infrastructure is such that whoever pays for it doesn't really matter. Everybody benefits from it. And there is merit to the argument that you should pay for someone else's infrastructure. Because it's not really someone else's infrastructure, it is everybody's infrastructure. Okay, well let's stop being abstract about it. Let's be pragmatic. Let's say the German government decides to build highways and trains out to Eastern Europe, which then allows Western European companies, German companies, to set up factories in Eastern Europe where the labor is cheaper. And now that there is decent infrastructure out there, they can transport their goods and products back to their markets. Right, that's it. That's the argument. Right, you want to build the trains and the roads to exploit the cheaper labor over there out in the east. Right, is that not a decent argument for Germany building infrastructure? Which, by the way, that's what the Chinese are doing. The Chinese, their so-called Belt and Road project. China is building infrastructure in other countries to get their resources. Well, not to get to buy their. I mean, they are buying they're not just stealing it. They're paying for it. But the idea is like, if you don't build the road, the locals in Africa and in whatever part of the world, they don't have the money to build their own roads. And so then you're never going to access those resources. So in order to access those resources, you build the road for them, give them the road, and you pay for the resources. Which seems fairly generous, but no, you're only doing it because you want the resources. Oh, I can't use iron bars because I need a horizontal glass. Alright, it's just glass. So the Chinese, for the sake of accessing minerals in Africa, for example, they would just like build a road for them. And this is perfectly logical from a purely economic perspective. Like, you're not really doing them a favor, you're doing yourself a favor. It turns out they also benefit from the road, but that's fine. Right. All you care about is getting the minerals. Whether they benefit or not is, it's secondary. Like that's like how the Chinese look at it. And why don't Europeans look at it the same way? Like, why don't Germany, for example, build better roads out to Eastern Europe? Again, just for the sake of accessing whatever resources are out in Eastern Europe. Oh, I don't want mossy cobble, I want mossy bricks. Mossy stone bricks. And the reason, I think the reason why that doesn't, like that sort of thing doesn't even occur to the German government is because their voters are too ethnocentric. Not all of them, but too many of them are too ethnocentric for them to see opportunities like that. Because if you say, hey, let's spend a few $1 billion building a road in a different country, like, I think every Western democracy would have difficulty selling that idea to their voters. Because the voters would think, why are we gifting them? Why are we gifting people from a different country several $1 billion? Is what they think. Is how they would conceive of that idea. And there are enough ethnocentric people in the world for that not to be able to get majority support in a democratic government. But if you build an empire, if you say, alright, we are no longer Germans and Polish, or Czechs, or whoever it is, we are all Europeans now. You create a new citizenship, and if you want to be extreme about it, which, I mean, I don't advocate for it, but hypothetically, if you want to be extreme about it, let's say you eradicate national languages and national identities. You create a new European language and you force people to use it. I'm not suggesting this is a good idea, but basically this is what the Qin dynasty did. The first Chinese dynasty standardized the language, so it obliterated all the other languages and it forced everybody to use the new standard Chinese of the time. And of course these days we would call that sort of thing cultural genocide, and it's true, it is cultural genocide. But it did lay the foundation for thousands and thousands of years of a unified Chinese identity that has lasted ever since. Right? That's the trade-off. And the question is that a worthwhile trade-off? And my argument is that because people are irredeemably ethnocentric, it would require something like that before people would see each other, before like the European Union would see themselves as one entity and not a collection of divided interests, competing interests, which is what a lot of people see the European as at the moment, unfortunately. I wish it wasn't the case. But Brexit happened because enough people saw the European Union as competing interests that they refused to continue to work together. Brexit. A democratic decision. Right? It is. Brexit was democracy in action. And really what I think it shows that people are not good enough for democracy, unfortunately. It's a lot of people collectively making a bad decision is what Brexit was.